And we are live. What is going on, YouTube? It is your boy, Faithful to God. And tonight's live stream will be dedicated to Lashawan Qadash, the fraudulent modern Hebrew pronunciation system, which is employed by a vast majority of the One West camps. For those who don't know, Lashawan Qadash is believed by the various proponents to be so-called ancient Paleo-Hebrew, when reality is the dialect is not ancient Hebrew. It is in fact a modern concoction that was created at 1 West 125th Street in Harlem by gentlemen who were ignorant of the basics of Hebrew history and Hebrew grammar. So what I wanted to do is to present to my audience, more specifically my Christian brothers and sisters, a defense against the camps who use this dialect. Now, some people may wonder, why is it important for us to have a discussion about the Hebrew language? I mean, the Hebrew language isn't a salvation issue. Now, that may be true for us, but for the various camps, this becomes an absolute salvation issue because in their doctrinal systems, they are of the belief that everything that they promote is an essential and it is pertinent to salvation. So, for instance, we have the ISUPK on your screen. They are one of the camps that believe that everything that they teach is a truth. This is why they carry the moniker the home of the truth. In reality, they're the home of the lies, but that's, you know, another topic for another day. But needless to say, but this is something that they hold to. And so Vocab Malone encountered the ISUPK on the street in Houston. And this is what one of the gentlemen said. So I want my audience to get a general idea of why topics like this are important. Here we go.
Right, because we couldn't. If you prove us wrong, right, that means if you prove one thing wrong, all of it's wrong. That's how I believe. If one thing is wrong, all of it is wrong. Right. So if you prove to your audience that we are wrong, then people shouldn't listen to us. Right. Because if I was on that side and you proved that they were wrong, I wouldn't listen to them.
So there you have it. The gentleman said, if you prove us wrong on this one thing, or on anything rather, then everything we believe must be wrong. And so therefore, this is the mindset that the various camps, especially those who hold to Lashawan Qadash as so-called ancient Hebrew, hold to. So it is important for us to discuss this topic and also for brothers and sisters to know, why is this one of the Achilles heels of the various camps? It's because this specific topic has gone untouched by various people for a very long time. In fact, I can recall even in debates versus other groups, Black nationalist groups, that there seems to be very little going into their so-called fraudulent Hebrew dialect. It's almost taken for granted. It's almost like they grant them the dialect and they say, well, let's focus on these other issues and leave the dialect alone. The reality is, though, that the various groups do not have a defense for that specific dialect system, or pronunciation system, I should say. And so what ends up happening is these issues do become a very, very significant Achilles heel for them, because the reality is that for those of us who have encountered these various groups on the specific dialect, none of them seem to be able to have even a remotely plausible defense in light of all the evidence against their dialect or pronunciation system. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to show former members of the ICGJC. For those who don't know, the ICGJC is the original One West school. I know General Johanna likes to put on that his camp is the original One West. That is not the case. The original school, believe it or not, is the Israelite Church of God in Jesus Christ, which today is headed up by Chaazawan. Why is this significant? 2 of the original 7 heads are still in the ICGJC because they never left. It was the original school. The reality is that Johanna was the one who split off from them over differences. And the reality is that Arya and Shar, 2 of the 7 heads, are still in the original school. The ISUPK that Johanna heads up has none of the original 7 heads. And also, the 2 original 7 heads that are still in the ICGJC because they never left were the ones who chose, or rather endorsed, Chaazawan's claim of being the so-called comforter. That's significant. Not saying that I agree with their endorsement. Of course, I don't agree with their endorsement. But the reality is, 2 of the 7 heads chose Johanna chose Tazadakia over Johanna while Johanna was still in the original school before he left. Very significant. But that'll be another topic for another day. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to screen share and I'm going to show former members of the ICGJC, and they will be sharing their thoughts on the fraudulent system known as Lashawan Qadash.
You know, so I remember one night in Orlando at the Lancaster Church. Not Lancaster. It was on Lancaster on Colonial. I think Lashawan was teaching that night. He was like the high priest of the state of Florida. He was going back and forth between Miami and Orlando teaching. But that night he was with us. I don't know if it was like a Thursday, Friday, or Saturday class. I don't remember exactly, but I do remember asking him. I was like, "Slacky, sir." I was like, "How do we know that the language that we speak or that we're learning is true?" Because I still to this day I haven't met any person in that church that could speak Lashawan Qadash fluently. So I asked him, I said, how do we...
Never heard common conversation between, not even the apostles.
Never. Dude. And I asked him, I said, are there any artifacts or any proof that we can show the people in the street that we teach in the fruits, that we can show them to prove that we're teaching the original language? But check his response, though. He says, brother, well, brother, we are the chosen people of God. We know our language. He said, we the chosen people of God, man. That's all you got to tell. And the class kind of broke out in the chuckle. He kind of chuckled too. I did too. I was like, "Con, sir, con." You know, I was hyped up. I was into that shit. It is funny that you said that. I was into that shit, knowing damn well that I did not get my question. So
that was his answer?
Yeah, bro. But check it. I had a conversation with him after he left. And we actually laughed about this.
He was like, I was full of shit.
He was like, brother, he was like, to be real with you, I ain't have an answer for you.
Yeah, I was full of shit.
Yeah, he said, I didn't know the answer I could think to tell you at the time.
Right.
And I said, I kind of figured that, but it just shows you like the little shit, the brainwashing goes, how deep the control goes, that you'll overlook shit. That makes sense.
So there you have former members of the ICGJC who were sharing their thoughts on the fraudulent dialect known as Lashawan Qadash. There you have them admitting openly that when they were in the school, they were basically told by their teacher, who was teaching them so-called Hebrew, i.e. the pronunciation system, that, yeah, we know our language. That was essentially the extent of the so-called evidence. Now, in fairness, though, there are some who attempt to try to make recourse to the paleo script. So that will be one of the arguments that they'll try to use. They'll say, well, look at the script. The square script that you see is one system, and then this is another system. But the reality is that a script in and of itself will not give you the system of pronunciation in a language. So, for example, Swahili incorporates the Arabic script, and yet Swahili and the Arabic language are two completely different languages, yet both different languages incorporate the Arabic script. That is significant because Swahili is not Arabic Arabic is not Swahili, and yet both systems are employing the exact same script. The same is true also of the Phoenician language and the Hebrew language. And I think that a lot of proponents of Lashawan Qadash don't realize the implications behind what they're saying, especially when they realize that there were cultures that incorporated the Phoenician script. And their system doesn't sound like Lashawan Qadash. In fact, we have ancient transliterations from the Israelite themselves that shows the pronunciation system that they employed sounds nothing like Lashawan Qadash. And so for those who don't know, what is the main claim for Lashawan Qadash? So the main claim is that you only have 2 vowel sounds in Hebrew. An A-class vowel for every character of the Hebrew alphabet, with the exception of the ayin, which they claim makes the I as in pi sound. So every other letter makes the A sound, except for the ayin, which makes the I sound. The reality is they have no proof at all from antiquity in the form of transliterations from the Israelites themselves, who retained their pronunciation into languages such as the Greek language, for instance. You know, a transliteration is something that captures vocalizations from one language into a completely different language using the script or the alphabet of the new language. So Lashawan Qadash has literally no evidence. And for those proponents who would then make recourse to things like Strong's Concordance or lexicons and see certain words that do incorporate the A-class vowel in it, this in and of itself is not proof for Lashawan Qadash, because the fact that you have one word in Lashawan, so-called Lashawan Qadash, that sounds exactly the same as it does in actual Hebrew does not mean that Lashawan Qadash has evidence in favor for it. It's the complete opposite. Lashawan Qadash as a system of grammar and as a just a flat out vocalization system has zero evidence in its favor. So with that being said, I don't know what's going on my screen. I see that this thing stopped loading. So, all right, here we go. Can you guys hear me? Hopefully you guys can hear me. There we go. Hopefully I didn't go on speaking for too long because it seemed like the connection cut out a little bit. So needless to say, the reality is this. I'm going to go ahead and show some examples, and then we're going to show some other videos. So on my screen, I'm going to go ahead and show what is called Lashawan Qadash, you know, and show the evidence against it. So for example, UPKers, i.e. One Westers and proponents of Lashawan Qadash claim that the relevant phrase is pronounced yada yada zakah. But look at how the Masoretic text renders it. And the Septuagint, which predates the Masoretic text. This is very important. The Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures made before the time of the apostles. And the New Testament was obviously composed by the apostles and their disciples. Look at how there is overlap between the Septuagint and New Testament and the Masoretic text, which came about later. Look at the Peshitta, which is a Syriac translation. Look how it renders the phrase. Even in the Arabic, in the Quran, look how the relevant phrase is rendered. And look at the Vulgate, and even the 1611 KJV bears witness against the pronunciation system that Ariyah concocted with Masha, and perhaps even before them, because there seems to be implications that Abba Bivens was also responsible for the dialect. Now, here goes another example. So proponents of Lashawan Qadash claim that the relevant Hebrew phrase is pronounced Yashar Allah. Yet, I'm going to start with right here. The Septuagint and the New Testament, look how it renders it. Israel. The Masoretic text, Yisrael. The Quran, Israel. The Peshitta and the Vulgate and the 1611 KJV, all rendering the relevant phrase, not as Yashar, but Yisra. That is significant. This shows that Lashawan Qadash is a fraudulent dialect. Now, as it says on the bottom, were all these sources using quote-unquote Yiddish too, even though many of these sources predate Yiddish? In fact, I don't think proponents of Lashawan Qadash realize that the dialect that they call Yiddish. In this case, they think it's all modern Israeli Hebrew, or even the biblical Hebrew that employs phrases like Elohim and things like that. They think Elohim is Yiddish, y'all. Well, they don't realize that that dialect that they ignorantly refer to as Yiddish, which is actual Hebrew in reference to biblical Hebrew, not talking about modern Israeli Hebrew, talking about biblical Hebrew. When they see Elohim, they think that's Yiddish. Well, that pronunciation system, that dialect, and actual Yiddish are actually two completely different languages. In fact, on our playlist, Lashawan Qadash Debunked on this channel, you can find videos debunking the argument that the actual Hebrew dialect and Yiddish are somehow the same when they are completely different. So when these people refer to the actual Hebrew language, i.e. Elohim and phrases like that, as Yiddish, they have no idea what they're talking about. In fact, we use an example from Genesis 11:5 in a Yiddish Bible and Genesis 11:5 in the actual Hebrew text with transliterations in place to show that the Yiddish, the actual Yiddish language, and the Hebrew they ignorantly call Yiddish are in fact two completely different languages. And as you can see on your screen, the pronunciations that they claim are Yiddish predate the Yiddish language. So how could they be Yiddish? It's just utter foolishness. Here goes another example. According to One Westers or UPKers, UPKer would stand for the original school, Universal Practical Knowledge, but One Westers for the umbrella term, rendered a relevant phrase as yai quab, quab because they think that the kof makes the qua sound, you know, ironically enough, having a U there, a hidden U sound. But look how the Septuagint renders it, Yaakov. Look at the Quran, Yaqub. But even if they argue and say, well, look, there's a U sound there, according to their pronunciation system, there is no U sound, ironically enough, even though the qua has the U sound in it. Masoretic, Yaakov, the 1611. There you go. And by the way, that I would have been pronounced originally as Yah. So Yaakov. All these other sources using Yiddish? Ridiculous, right? In fact, I'm going to show 5 languages written in 5 different languages. In fact, what I'll do is I'll point out, y'all can hear me. So we have 5 languages here. You have Hebrew. You actually have, if you give me one moment, trying to balance 2 things out. You actually have Hebrew, Aramaic, Arabic, Ladino, and Yiddish. Okay? So you have 5 different languages on your screen. Now, this first line, second, third, fourth, and fifth, these are the 5 different languages, all right? All of them are incorporating the square script, and yet these are all different languages. If someone were to look at this in ignorance, if they know nothing about the Hebrew language, they would think all of this is Hebrew. The bottom is incorporating the Paleo-Hebrew script, not the square script, but the Paleo script. And it's the same 5 languages being rendered in 5 different scripts. So here's a perfect example of how you can have different languages incorporating the exact same script, and yet they are 5 different languages with 5 different pronunciation systems. It is amazing to think that One Westers and others who promote that fraudulent dialect system called Lashawan Qadash have no idea about this. All right. So far, we're disproving this dialect, y'all. Notice that the guy from the ISUPK said if we could show him one thing that they get wrong, well, this is absolutely, positively one incredibly wrong thing that the ISUPK gets wrong. Now, what I want to do is show some of the excuses that some of the various groups will use. If you give me a moment. The various groups will say things like the following. So for example, this is GMS. I'm about to show them on my screen in a moment, y'all. Bear with me. All right. So this is GMS. And look at the excuse that they're going to use. This is the sort of argumentation that they'll use to defend the dialect, since they have no real evidence for it. Here we go.
Nobody can say they got the proper Hebrew.
When we speak to Lashawan Qadash, it's based upon faith.
Right. Yeah, faith.
Okay? GMS Dallas was going off a little because they would say, yo, it's Abba, it's Allah, this, that, and the other. Yeah, based upon faith.
Right.
You have to go on an argument in the Hebrew because we don't know what the real Hebrew is. You know?
It's by faith.
We believe it's all about belief. We believe that we're speaking the real Hebrew.
So there you have it. Tahar of GMS, this is the gentleman that you're seeing on your screen, is admitting that they don't know if they're speaking the real Hebrew, but they think they're speaking the real Hebrew, and they take it on faith. Now, this isn't the same faith that Christ talks about blessed are those who do not see and believe. This is blind, utter faith, the same blind faith, you know, the blind leading the blind and they both fall into a ditch. That blind faith, the one that Christ rebuked, that is the faith that this man is ultimately referring to without even realizing it. Because Lashawan Qadash has no evidence in its favor. And yet you have a man here who is essentially telling you, yeah, we just take it on faith. We take it on faith because that's what they were taught in the original school. The original school taught these men to basically just believe it and that's it. And the reality is, if you realize how they even came to the so-called understanding that this was ancient Hebrew, you'll realize that it was faulty from the jump. Guys talking about they got visitations from angels, kind of like Joseph Smith got a visitation from an angel. It's amazing to me to think that these people are employing the same argumentation that Mormons employ. But, you know, it is what it is. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and move along to a few more pieces of evidence. Here's an example, and I was going to show this earlier. Here's an example of the ISUPK making recourse to the Paleo script. This is essentially the extent of their argumentation. And they also utilize one more thing, which is Zephaniah 3 and 9, which is another excuse. These are literally the two so-called evidences that the camps use. Neither of them actually proves their case. As we saw earlier, a script will not show you the system of pronunciation in a language. Right? It won't. A script in and of itself won't tell you how a language is going to sound, is what I'm ultimately saying. So here you have on your screen, this was Kaposh of the ISUPK versus Surreal. And this was their discussion sometime in 2018, if I'm not mistaken. So let's go ahead and listen to this. This is the extent of the argumentation. Listen here.
Yep. All right. So he made a claim that the Lashawan Qadash was invented by a brother in 1969 in our school. That he basically made this out of like fucking, you know, he just made up some letters and called it ancient Hebrew. All right. This is the Lashawan Qadash right here. We got the Abba Gada Hawa Zachata Yakala Manasa I Patazakwa Rasha and Tha. Okay. Well, you guys can see. Okay. Pretty well. Now we're going to pull the same and out of the Bible dictionary. All right. This is the Zondervan's Memorial Bible Dictionary. Okay. And the ISUPK, even though people think, you know, give us a lot of credit, we did not write this book. You understand that? Now, you will see right here where it says alphabet going into the Hebrew, the modern Hebrew. Right here. That's the ah. I got my finger on the ah. I have my finger on the ah so you can hear it. Now, make sure y'all can see it. Say ah. Okay, that's the ah. This is the ah in the Lashawan Qadash that we teach in school since 1969. They are both the same character. They are both the same.
It is utterly amazing to see that the ISUPK thinks that showing a script is essentially proving the pronunciation system that they claim is ancient Hebrew. I want everyone to listen closely. They think that showing the script in and of itself is proving their claim. But the reality is that they have no evidence for the pronunciations. So the relevant question to be asked in return to the member of the ISUPK would be, what is your proof in the form of a transliteration from the Israelites themselves to prove that everything you just said is true? Because they'll claim that every relevant Hebrew character in the alphabet only carries one single vocalization. A for every single letter with the exception of the ayin, which they claim makes the I as in pie sound. This is absolutely positively insane to me, that these men are essentially making recourse to a single script. Now, imagine if you have someone who was utilizing the Phoenician script for the Phoenician language, and he says, look, your script is the same as my script. How would both sides come to the conclusion that one is the other and not the same? How would the guys that promote Lashawan Qadash distinguish between their dialect and someone using Phoenician if they both incorporate the same script? Do you see how ridiculous the argument this gentleman used was? Because you're not going to get a pronunciation system merely from a script, because there are rules of grammar that are incorporated into the language. Yes, the script in and of itself, like by itself, is not going to give you that system. However, the script can be a part of that system. But what they're doing is they're essentially only making recourse to the script and saying, look, this is Lashawan Qadash. Here's another thing that they don't realize. The relevant phrase Lashawan Qadash is actually their way of saying Lashawan Qadash. They don't realize that that phrase appears in the Mishnah and in other writings that they consider to be the quote-unquote so-called Jews' writings or Amalek's writings. And yet they're using the phrase and they're saying that this is the phrase that's used by the patriarchs. Now, ironically enough, the actual phrase Lashon Kodesh, or as they would say in the fraudulent dialect, Lashawan Qadash, that combined phrase doesn't actually appear in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, the Hebrew text. That combined phrase, not the two phrases separately, but the combined phrase that they say, Lashawan Qadash, that combined phrase appears nowhere in the Hebrew text. Just something for a lot of y'all to take into consideration. Just thought I'd bring that out. Now, with that being said, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and show one more video. Let me actually stop sharing this screen real quick. This is also directed at the ISUPK because for a long time there, ISUPK members have been claiming that, they know Hebrew. So General Johanna's name is pronounced in, a specific, they say Johanna is Johanna. Well, here's the thing. The following video is going to expose this small little thing as something significant. Let's go ahead and watch the following video. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. Hopefully all of you guys can see what I'm showing. So let's take a look at the following video from Abu Kamr, who is an opponent of Lashawan Qadash as well. And let's see what he has to say about the name Johanna.
Here's the question I want to ask, and I'm serious about this question. How do you spell Johanna, the name of the leader of the ISUPK, in Hebrew? I think this is an interesting question because I think while most Lashawan Qadash names transliterated into the Latin script, you can easily figure out what the Hebrew characters for that would be. This is a case where there's a lot of different possible spellings, especially since it's a name that's quite old within the history of Lashawan Qadash names. And also, I think there's some interesting potential historical notes that could be made. So that's the question that I want to ask. How do you spell Johanna, which is to say the name of the leader of the ISUPK? How do you spell that name in Hebrew? What are the characters? So I'm going to go through a few possibilities, a few possible permutations. I'll render them both in the standard Hebrew script known as the Ashuri script, as well as in the ancient Phoenician script, which they also call the Paleo-Hebrew script. And I'm going to use the diacritical marks that were created by Arya, completely ahistorical, completely modern, but nonetheless, they're used by proponents of Lashawan Qadash. For those who aren't familiar with these little marks that you'll see under the Phoenician script, if it looks like a frown, that mark signifies simply an ah vocalization for the character it's underneath. However, if it looks like a smile, that connects two characters in which the second character is unvocalized. Proponents of Lashawan Qadash will be familiar with these diacritical marks. So, is Johanna's name in Hebrew simply three syllables, Ya, Ha, Na? And is it simply spelled Yod, He, Nun, with the last character being vocalized? Is that how his name is spelled in Lashawan Qadash? Or is his name spelled Yod, He, Nun, He, just with the final H not appearing, the final He not appearing at the end of transliterations? It's sort of just unwritten. Is that the case? Is it spelled with four letters? Or is it spelled with four letters, however, with the final letter being an aleph, Johanna? Is that the spelling? Is that the way you spell Johanna in Hebrew, in Lashawan Qadash? Yod He Nun Aleph? However, I'll concede that when I see the name Johanna transliterated into the Latin script, it's usually transliterated with two N's. And so maybe that's not superfluous. Maybe that's not a mistake. Maybe that signifies that two Nuns appear in the name. So might it be spelled Yod He Nun Nun with the final Nun, the final N being vocalized? Is that how his name is spelled? Admittedly, this spelling would be somewhat close to the historical spelling in Hebrew of the name John, not Jonathan, but rather the name John, Yohanan. However, it uses a he instead of a chet, and I think that's significant. But nonetheless, if you took out the wa, this would be fairly close, save for the he instead of the chet. Or might it be spelled Yod He Nun Nun Aleph, Yohanna, again, with the first Nun, the first N being silent. Is that how his name is spelled in Hebrew? In Lashawan Qadash? Is that how proponents of Lashawan Qadash, including Johanna himself and his many followers, is that how they spell his name in Hebrew? Or was it spelled with a he instead? Yod He Nun Nun He. And again, with the first Nun not being vocalized. Might that be the way that the name Johanna is written in Lashawan Qadash? Or was the name simply based on his English name, John? For example, perhaps insisting that there's no J in Hebrew, maybe the J was quickly turned to a Y, and then insisting that there's no O in Hebrew, the O was quickly changed to an A, and then maybe they figured, hey, what the heck, why not just vocalize the other two characters as well? And by the way, for anyone who might be scandalized by the last character being vocalized, that realize that's not typical of proponents of Lashawan Qadash today, but it was apparently a part of the early stages of the development of Lashawan Qadash. For example, there are people who remember Bivens, quote unquote, Abba Bivens, using Shalama instead of Shalawam. And then, of course, there's also the name for Israel, Yasher Allah. That raises the question about why is it Yasher Allah and not Yasher Al? And of course, that comes up with a lot of other names that use the word El in them, like Nathaniel was rendered Nathanya Allah, Ariel was rendered Ariala, etc. So why is El rendered Allah instead of Al? And in fact, because it was unclear within Lashawan Qadash as to when the last character was vocalized and when it was not, that was precisely why Arya created these new diacritical marks for the Phoenician script, for the so-called Paleo-Hebrew script. It was precisely because he needed some sort of a marker for when to vocalize a character and when not, because it was somewhat arbitrary in his system. And that's ironic in itself. So in a nutshell, there are a few different possibilities, a few different permutations under the Lashawan Qadash system. There's a few different ways to render the name Johanna. And that's why I want to ask, first and foremost, members of the ISUPK, perhaps even Johanna himself, how do you spell that name? How do you spell the name Johanna, which is to say the name of the leader of the ISUPK? How do you spell that name in Hebrew? And of course, people who are not with the ISUPK, but maybe were former members of One West or parts of members of other One West splinter groups, I'm happy to hear the answer from them as well. So that's my main question. How do you spell Johanna in Hebrew?
So I want to thank Abu for the question that he asked, and it is a significant question. Again, how do proponents of Lashawan Qadash justify the name Johanna? I mean, this is a very salient point that should be addressed, because if they are claiming to have all this immense great understanding, why are they then incorporating pronunciations into names that, I mean, you can't even, Johanna? I'm really trying to think about this. I'm trying to give it some thought. What could have been the basis behind Johanna. So definitely would look forward to answers from the ISUPK on that relevant question. And for those who don't know, Abu has actually been engaging the ISUPK for some time. He has actually asked them various questions. I had various screenshots of his tweets to them, but let me go ahead and just show one for now, if I can find my screen. And so this is an example of some of the questions that he has asked them regarding that relevant question that was posed. And so here we go. So he has asked the question, could you tell me how Johanna, the name of the leader of your group, is written in Hebrew? Right. So this was sometime earlier in this week, but he's actually had some other, he's asked this question on other occasions as well, and he has yet to receive an answer from the ISUPK. So he has not just asked the ISUPK UK, he's also asked other ISUPK Twitter accounts, including my apologies, y'all. My apologies. I dropped out of there. So Quinal Lawa would be another one of the proponents who has tweaked the dialect and does not pronounce that character, the 18th character in the Hebrew alphabet, as Taza. He pronounces it much differently than proponents of Lashawan Qadash. So that's why the question was being posed. Now, If I can read on, I believe that might be this. And here goes another one. Here goes another minor question. He says, while this might be a minor question, I want to know how Johanna, the name of the leader of the ISUPK, is spelled in Hebrew. So this was essentially the same question that he posed in the videos. So, with that being said, I just wanted to highlight some of those things to the audience out there. And I also wanted to be on record that another thing they make an appeal to is Zephaniah 3 and 9. So very quickly, I'm going to tackle that. I'm not going to go into it too in depth, but I'm going to provide a very thorough refutation of their misuse of that. So what they'll do is they'll go to the KJV, they'll look at Zephaniah 3 and 9, and they'll say, where it says, let me actually go there real quick, Zephaniah. And then what they'll do is this, they'll read where it says, for then I will turn to the people, for then will I turn to the people a pure language, that they may call upon the name of the Lord to serve him with one consent. Now, the reality of the matter is that what's being regarded there, and let me actually take Mr. Commer's question off of the screen before I continue on, if I could actually find it. If I could actually find his relevant question. I can't find it. It's all good. So Zephaniah 3:9 is not a proof text, and I'm going to explain why. So the relevant Hebrew word there, I believe, is, if off the top of the head, I believe it's, what is the relevant? It's Zapha, I think it is. I could be mispronouncing it. I do apologize. Give me a moment. Let me actually look at the text. Zapha, right, which is language, right? But here's what they don't realize, that relevant phrase in Hebrew has its root word in the phrase for lip. So to a pure lip can also be used there. Now, a pure lip could be indicating a variety of different things. But in this case, we understand when we look at Zephaniah 3:13 that it is the content of speech that is in view. Because if a person continues reading, they're going to get to 13 and they're going to see the relevant portion that states the following. Let me actually pull it up. All right. And typically I would screen share this, but I'm still trying to work my way around this specific streaming program or whatever it is. Zephaniah 3:13. The remnant of Israel shall do no iniquity, nor speak lies, neither shall a deceitful tongue be found in their mouth, for they shall feed and lie down, and none shall make them afraid. Now, interestingly enough, the same Hebrew word in the plural form, because the singular form is employed in Zephaniah 3:9, the plural form is actually used in Isaiah 6 and 5. And let me go ahead and read it in the English, and it reads, then I said, woe is me, for I am done, because I am a man of unclean lips. And the plural form appears in the Hebrew text beneath this specific English translation. And I will dwell in the midst of the people of unclean lips. Again, the relevant phrase in the plural appears there. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. So the content of speech, both here and in Zephaniah, is in view. And the relevant Hebrew phrase in the plural form is being utilized here, and is also being utilized in the singular form in Zephaniah 3 and 9. Once one considers Zephaniah 3:13, of course, context being the ultimate villain against the false doctrines of the one Westers, since they don't seem to consider context. So with that being said, I think I'm going to go ahead and just wrap this one up. And for those of you out there who would like to learn more, again, the link for Lashawan Qadash debunked or exposed will be in the description of this video and also in the live stream. In fact, I'll go ahead and post that now. So whoever looks at the live stream after this is done can actually grab the link and watch it for themselves and see the refutations against the dialect thoroughly. And we also plan to do more refutations in the future. In fact, what I'll do is I'll just highlight it on the screen for all of y'all to see. This would be the relevant link. Of course, it will be in the description either way. And why is this significant? Again, because the one Westers are making this a priority. Now, to be very fair to other One West groups such as IUIC, they don't use Lashawan Qadash. In fact, Nathaniel has abandoned the dialect. He disdainfully refers to it as Hebonics, or I won't say the relevant word, but I'll say the N-word Hebrew. That's something that he himself refers to the dialect as. But Hebonics, I guess in the more cleaner way or cleaner version. And so even former proponents of the dialect have recognized that it is a fraudulent system that has no basis, no defensible basis. And there is no evidence for it in antiquity. So I also wanted to point out that he's not the only one. If I'm not mistaken, ISOC has rejected as well. I could be mistaken on that. If any ISOC member sees this, they are free to correct me. However, there are those people who have then left IUIC and have gone to embrace the dialect, such as Shakia, who heads up the Strong Towers camp, and I believe also One Body in Yahushai. They were formerly in IUIC, if I'm not mistaken, and they too have embraced the dialect. But the reality is that neither of those men have any evidence for the dialect. Because there just isn't any evidence. In fact, it's merely one of these, oh, we take it on faith type of things. And I think it's just them trying to be contrarian in essence to not acknowledge that the Hebrew that they disdainfully refer to as Yiddish is in fact actual Hebrew. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up. I want to thank everyone who joined me in the chat and also who has been watching the video. I want to thank Abu also for his contributions to this video and also for all the contributions that he has brought to the table over the years against this fraudulent dialect, including our contributions. And so for those of you out there, I would implore Christian brothers and sisters, if you're going to interact with the camps, I would highly recommend that you ask them questions about Lashawan Qadash. You know, the reality is that once you start pressing the ones that actually use it, and I'll name some of the camps, not all the camps use it, but here are some of the camps. So you have ISUPK, you have AOC, that's Ambassadors of Christ. You have Sicarii, you have GMS, you have House of David Church, you have One Body in Yahushai, you have a Strong Tower, and if I've left anyone out, oh, the ICGJC, the original school, they still utilize it. GOCC, that's Gathering of Christ Church, they use that fraudulent Hebrew system. So any of you who encounter any of these camps on the street, I would implore you to ask them questions such as, can you show me an ancient transliteration that shows that the 18th character is rendered Taza? Is there any evidence? Can you show me why the ancient Israelites rendered the phrase that you refer to as Yashar Allah as Yisrael or Israel in their transliteration? Oh boy, here we go. All right, there we go. Little things like that are going to debunk the fraudulent system that they are utilizing. And they're not used to hearing those sort of arguments against their system. So if you decide to utilize that argumentation, believe me, if it's the camps that use strong and wrong, like Strong Tower and maybe One Body in Yahushai, remnants of their time in IUIC, although all the other camps utilize it, they just don't call it strong and wrong, then you should press them until they admit that they have no evidence. And once they do, you should remind them, especially if it's groups like the ISUPK who make this an absolute priority, remind them that they have said that if they were disproven or shown to be wrong on one single thing, they should give up everything. And that is very significant. Let's see if the camps will actually hold up, the ones that hold to that line of reasoning. Let's see if they'll hold up to that promise of letting go of all the false doctrines that they hold to. And there are tons and tons of false doctrines. Believe me, Lashawan Qadash is just one of the many. And you can look at the playlist on my channel against all the various camps to see just how much the camps are getting wrong. It is more than one thing. But with that being said, I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. And for my brothers and sisters in the Lord, I would ask you to keep members of the ISUPK and all other proponents of Lashawan Qadash in prayer. With that being said, God bless you all. I hope this has edified someone out there. And until next time, take care.